On the morning of June 30th, 1908, deep in the remote Siberian wilderness, where endless stretches of pine trees swallowed the horizon, everything seemed quiet, almost too quiet. But in just a few minutes, this calm landscape would become the center of one of the greatest scientific mysteries in human history. Around 7:17 a.m., villagers living near the Tunguska River heard an unusual sound cutting through the sky, a rising whistle, sharp and unnatural, like metal being dragged across the clouds. When they looked up, they saw something terrifying, a glowing fireball streaking downward, brighter than the sun itself. Witnesses said the light had a blue-white core, like a star falling toward Earth. There was no time to react. Only seconds later, the world exploded. A blinding flash lit the sky. A shockwave tore across the land with the fury of 1,000 storms. People living 60 kilometers away were blown off their chairs. Windows shattered. Houses shook violently, as if the ground itself were splitting open. The explosion was so powerful, it was detected all the way in England. Within moments, fire swallowed the vast Siberian forest. Nearly 80 million trees were flattened in a perfect radial pattern, like a giant hand had slammed down from above. And yet, at the very center of this destruction, the trees still stood upright, scorched black, stripped bare, as if frozen in time by an invisible force. The blast was estimated at 10 to 15 megatons, about 1,000 times stronger than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. But what was even stranger was what didn't appear. No crater, no meteorite, no fragments of space rock, no evidence of anything solid ever hitting the ground. It was a disaster without a culprit. Nearly 20 years passed before anyone dared to travel into the devastation. The area was too remote, too dangerous. Finally, in the 1920s, Russian explorer Leonid Kulik led the first scientific expedition. When he entered the ruined forest, he described it as walking into a natural graveyard, silent, empty, haunted. The charred trees at the center stood like burned pillars guarding a secret. Kulik was certain he'd find a crater, or at least some pieces of a meteorite, but week after week, he found nothing. No impact site. No metal, no stone, nothing that belonged to the heavens. And that was when Tunguska shifted from a disaster to a legend. Scientists proposed theories, but none explained everything. The most widely accepted idea was that a rocky asteroid exploded midair before hitting the ground. That could explain the lack of a crater, but not the upright trees in the center, and not the complete absence of meteorite dust. Another theory suggested a comet, a frozen ball of ice, had entered the atmosphere and vaporized completely. But if that were true, chemical traces should have remained in the soil. They didn't. Some suggested a methane explosion from under the earth, but the trees had been flattened from above, not below. And then came the stranger theories. Some believed it was the crash of an alien spacecraft, a ship that self-destructed in midair. Others said it was the accidental result of a Nikola Tesla experiment gone wrong, a beam of energy fired from halfway across the world. There was no evidence for either idea, but the mystery at the heart of Tunguska made people believe almost anything. What made this event even more compelling were the eyewitness accounts. One man said he heard an explosion like artillery fire, followed by a wave of heat so intense it burned his skin. Another said the ground shook like something enormous had slammed into it, but the direction of the wind and force were unlike any explosion people had ever seen. More than a century later, Tunguska remains unsolved. Dozens of expeditions, hundreds of scientific papers, thousands of theories, yet none explain every piece of the puzzle. The symmetrical blast pattern, the upright trees of the center, the absence of debris, the sheer explosive power with no source. Kulik once wrote that the site felt, quote, as if something had been here and left before we could find its footprints, unquote. Even modern scientists hesitated to call the case closed. Today, the forest has grown back. Nature has reclaimed the land. But the mystery still lingers in the air, like the ghost of a disaster no one fully understands. Tunguska is the largest explosive event in modern history. Without a crater, without fragments, without answers. A question carved into the earth, waiting for a truth we still don't have. And perhaps the most unsettling part isn't the mystery itself, but the possibility that what happened in 1908 could happen again. without warning, without mercy,
Không phải trái đất
and
nữa.
without leaving a trace.